Hi, this is Real World Audio Christmas Special Edition, and today it's a very hard day, and Nelly's been working in the kitchen since the morning, preparing tons of food, and I get the hard job to man the stereo and put on Christmas music. That's been my really hard labor today, and actually I have to admit that I kind of failed at it at times, because I started with Chopin waltzes, which is not your typical Christmas music, with Dinu Lipati. He's an amazing Romanian pianist, and as you see, it's a mono recording, and it's absolutely fantastic. And actually I used it also not just to listen to it for myself, but also as a test record, because what have you thought what I was doing today when I woke up in the morning? Of course, I had to do some stereo tweaking. There is no holiday without doing something fun, and my fun project for this morning was to do a little tweak on my amplifiers, and that little tweak was to be able to choose between levels, between input levels, because these are very heavily modified Ampex amplifiers. These are the monitor amps that were designed and used for cinema, for movie theaters, and actually they have really high gain. So in the original version there's an extra tube, so there are two input tubes, because the input of the original was line level, so basically it's like microphone input. So however, now we have CDs, LPs, digital, and so on, so you absolutely don't need that first tube stage in it. But even with that single input tube, using that as an input tube, and then you have the 6S and 7 phase splitter, and then the power tubes, it still has excessively high gain. And as a result, what I needed to do, I always had to turn the volume down to number 1 if I wanted to listen quietly. And not just quietly, but even at number 1 settings, if I want to listen to a record or to a CD, then I had to basically choose like the lowest volume setting, and maybe up to 9 o'clock, and that's it, because it has so much gain. However, why am I bothering with it? It's because I'm also using these guys for Netflix. We are watching a lot of movies with them, and with that the input level is much lower. So actually with Netflix and stuff, I end up turning up the volume to halfway, and sometimes if I listen to very loud, to 1 o'clock. But that's excessively loud, really. So most of the time the volume knob is turning really down. And why is that a bad thing? Even though I have an AVC, an autoformer based volume control, but with it I still notice that it sounds the best when it's at full volume. So if I take the volume down and down and down, even just taking it down from full volume to 1 tick down, there's a major change in sound quality. And then it kind of stays, but as I go lower and lower, it's losing life from it. Not nearly at that level as a regular volume pod does, but it's still noticeable. And it's something, the volume control is a thing that is a quest. That is a quest for everyone. There is not a single solution. And you think, oh, let's just do it digitally. No, just digital volume control is much inferior to an autoformer based volume control. However, when I use, so for my single-ended amp, I can max out the volume control because the input sensitivity is way lower than the ampex. So for that, when I listen to turntable or CDs, I can just max it out, leave it at the max volume, and I can enjoy music with that. And it's not excessively loud; it's just perfect. However, with these fellows, my problem is that I always have to keep volume down to 1 when I listen during daytime or average, or go up to like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. But if I want to listen quiet music, then I have to keep it at 1, and here's an extra volume pot in the front that's a resistor, and I have to take it down to halfway or less to enjoy quiet music, because even though when I have the volume setting at 1, it is still very loud if I listen to records. So what I did today is something that I wanted to do for a long time to solve that situation, is that for the input tube, I put on a switch. So there is the switch there. And flipping that switch, I can choose whether I have that input tube function as a voltage gain tube or as a cathode follower. So basically what's happening is that in one position, so at the current position of that switch, the output that goes to the coupling capacitor that feeds the phase splitter, so now the output comes from the cathode. And now that tube doesn't add any voltage gain, just adds as a cathode follower. And so there's no gain. So whatever signal I'm getting in, it is forwarding that same level to the phase splitter. The only thing that it's adding as a cathode follower is much lower output impedance from what it sees from the interconnect. And why is that a good thing? Why is that a bad thing? AudioNote, for example, absolutely refuses to use cathode follower anywhere in its amps and preamps, because it switches the phase, so you have 180 degrees out of phase. I don't really care about that. I have a phase switch, I can flip the phase whenever I want, so it's not a problem for me. And I've noticed that if you have a cathode follower and it's treated well, then it can really have a beneficial effect on the average of the sound. Of course, adding an extra stage is always adding a potential source of problems, but this was the easiest way to solve this issue. Later on I will try that the switch will be just flicking between adding the tube in as a voltage gain versus just cutting out the tube and then having the input directly from the interconnect to the phase splitter. Right now it's going through the first tube as a cathode follower, and if I flick the switch to the other position, then the output comes from the plate, and then I add voltage gain. So basically right now I've been listening to all my Christmas music with the volume set to the max, because now with this flick I'm basically switching like do I have like a zero gain added or plus 26 dB from that input tube added to the volume. And that's absolutely wonderful, because for my LPs and CDs I do not need that extra 26 dB gain. However, if I'm using Netflix or movies as a source, then this is not enough for a lot of the material that's being streamed. They would come in, well, it's still listenable, but at a quiet volume. So that's when the flick comes in. So for that, when we switch on for movie night, I just flick the switch and bingo, I have a different range for volume selection. And guys, believe it or not, this is just absolutely critical. So the ability to have your volume control operate at the optimum level, I would say that's one of the last frontiers for any stereo system. And basically that's what you want to do. You always want to leave your volume control at the max out position, or you even can totally ignore the volume control, and that's what you can do as well. Just optimize your stereo system that it's at a volume which is optimal for your listening. And that's what happened today. So I put on, so this switch was already there, so that was the switch that I could choose between 2 dB feedback or 0 feedback. So that was the feedback switch, and it's at the perfect position to make this switch happen without adding extra wiring and without adding anything to lengthen the signal path. That's really critical, that you want to use with as short wires as possible when you are working with amplifiers. So I used that switch which was already there. However, now I do not have access to adding the negative feedback. I do not have that option, and I don't really care about that because it sounds better without feedback anyway. And for those scenarios when the power sucks, then it is of greater benefit to use your first tube as a cathode follower to have an extra current drive than having the ability to add a few dBs of feedback. So that was my report for today. And of course, how I started with Dino Lipati. When I listened to the first side, it sounded pretty disappointing. Of course, everything was dead code. The amplifiers were code, loudspeakers were code, the cantilever dead code, phono stage code, and normally it takes at least one side of a record to play before it wakes up. And now it needed to do much more than waking up. It needed to break in. So all those solder joints and soldering that I have done need to break in. So when I flipped on to the other side of this LP, then already the second side was showing what I was hoping for, and that I just gained like a lot of extra low-level detail information. The music became so much more beautiful when listening at lower levels, and not just listening at lower levels, but the low level of information which is close to the noise floor or even below the noise floor, it became just so much more clear, so much more shaded. So now these amps moved one big step closer to the single-ended triode experience. So this was where they were clearly inferior before compared to the single-ended triodes, but now they made a really big step up. So now I can listen to quiet music with them, while before I needed to do my single-ended triode, I needed to engage it for that sort of listening. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Have a Merry Christmas. And just a couple extra records here we've been listening to. This was a beautiful record, and this is what I'm going to continue with. A Hungaroton record. Craig, this is a shout out for you. So thank you everyone. Have a Merry Christmas. Bye bye.